Navid Akhtar from Alchemia. And Navid, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be here with you.
Fantastic, fantastic. And we were just before we went live, you were telling me about how your wife is actually an artist, and I think you can really see that quite clearly in the backgrounds that we have. So on my side, we've got this slightly disheveled-looking bookcase, and I use my head to cover this poster that says "Stay cool and chill out" because I feel like it's a bit unprofessional. Um, and then on your side, it's very much on brand, isn't it? Alchemia is a beautiful brand.
Yeah, and I guess it's just. I mean, first of all, I'm very proud of my wife, Zara Hussain, her work. So I always try to do what I can to support my wife, and but also, yeah, the whole thing is about showing the beauty of Islam. We know that Hadith. Allah is beautiful and loves beauty, so we make a real point of pushing that across as much as possible.
Fantastic. And look, and Navid, I reached out to you because I followed your journey for quite a while, on and off, and Alhamdulillah, I'm really happy to see that you on here for a number of reasons. Firstly, because it's great to see Muslim entrepreneurship. Secondly, it's great to see Muslim entrepreneurship in an area that Muslims are historically very underrepresented in and not very good at even when they do get involved at. And thirdly, because of course, you guys have recently become part of Amazon Prime. I mean, I say recently, relatively recently, and I thought it'd be just a fantastic moment to just check in with you on that whole journey, especially I think given your long track record in the field as well, in the field of media. And but before we get into all of that, Navid, do you want to just give us maybe like a really quick snapshot of Alchemia, and then we'll rewind all the way back to how it all started?
Yeah, it's a video on demand service, a subscription video on demand service, and it's aimed at what we call the global urban Muslim. So we made some very clear distinctions when we started. We always wanted to make sure that the content was very professional. We're finding broadcast quality content from around the world. We also wanted to make sure that it covered a very global viewpoint of what Islamic culture is and Islamic history. We made a distinction that it's not a religious channel. We're not really prescriptive, so we're not teaching people how to practice Islam. We're much more descriptive. So what we're sharing is really this idea of just what's come out of Islam, the culture, the kind of civilization, the science, the thought. And so we wanted to do all of that. So it sort of works on many different levels, and the initial idea was that perhaps it would be a channel in the conventional sense, but as we started to kind of research and get going, it was obvious that that whole shift out of that movement into kind of video online and video on demand was there, and it made sense for us to there. So really we're aiming to, we are a large collection of content. It's very diverse. Predominantly, our customer base is educated. They're in the West. They're mostly Muslims of the West, so Europe, UK, US. But when we sort of went further afield, we realized actually they're everywhere. These kind of people are everywhere. And we also made a point of two very specific points in terms of the editorial. One, we don't do current affairs. We really wanted to decouple the idea of Islam as only something as you see on the news. So we don't really go into what's going on now at the moment. We don't do any political analysis, and also we made a very conscious point that if a non-Muslim was to come to the channel, they should be able to watch. They will watch it.
You'll find something useful.
So yeah, not more than useful. Something that they'll really like and they'll love and they'll learn something. And so because of that, we really avoid the kind of the language and the kind of specialist language, clothing, all of that kind of stuff. We even everything from the fonts to the design, it's really tailored to feel like a piece of mainstream kind of a mainstream service. So there's no extra green domes with gold ties
yeah.
and get that kind of branding. Yeah, and
And
that's done very purposely, not to put people off, not to put non-Muslims off, because at the moment it's hard to estimate. It could be in the past we've had as much as 10% of the customer base, but we do believe that that was a very important part of what we wanted to achieve, was to non-Muslims should feel that if there's a documentary on the architecture of Yemen and they're interested in that, they can come here and watch it.
definitely, and I really want to dig into that later on. But Naveed, the first thing I wanted to do, especially for some of our audiences who might want to go into the media at some point, or some of our audiences who lament the fact that there aren't that many Muslims in the media or the media industry generally. I just thought it'd be absolutely fascinating to just kind of pick through your history. So you worked at the BBC initially, then Channel 4, you freelanced. You were quite a senior person, and in many ways still are a senior person in the industry, specifically from a Muslim and a diversity lens. So I really wanted to understand, how early was it when you realized that you wanted to actually go into this whole area?
It's hard to say, really, but I think I sort of belong to that generation. I'm not quite the first arrivals into mainstream British life in terms of my brother's generation. He's a bit older than me. They were literally the first brown kids at school, as it were. And I was, in fact, in my family, I was the first who was born in Britain. So there was a joke that I was the one who had the British passport before everybody, in the family. So because when my dad came in the late 50s, and then it was the 5-year plan, make money and go back. And so actually it was odd that a child was being born here. So by the time I got to school, there was a number of us. And I think those of us who had dual, we were bilingual. So we spoke, I spoke Punjabi, I spoke a bit of Urdu. I'd often get called into the headmaster's study to help translate with some parents. And so actually, so that is the process of mediating. You're explaining from one thing to another. And so I just seemed to have these natural skills. And then we did go back. I went back to Pakistan, and I had a whole year in Pakistan, which it was a very difficult time for me. I was, 10 years old, and I came back very angry as a teenager. I really felt that, I missed out a lot on life and all the things, fish and chips and all the things, Blue Peter. I sort of had the rug underneath my feet. And I think my dad tried it for a year as an experiment, gave up. The good thing, I look back now, obviously I learned, improved my Urdu. I learned a lot about, our heritage country. And then when I came back, I went through a very rebellious phase. And I think that's really what I saw. People who are in the media tend to be troublemakers. You tend to be somebody who has to have this, you're going to be different. And even sort of so I just used to kind of watch a lot of TV, because you're talking about social isolation. Well, we lived through that as kids, because if you went out, you got your head kicked in, so it was a very difficult time.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time sitting indoors watching telly, or learning how to navigate past people who could be quite violent, especially where I grew up in East London. You wanted to stay away from certain groups of people. And
Whereabouts in East London were you?
Yeah, Walthamstow. And that's
right, okay.
Walthamstow with an F. So I'm a Cockney geezer. And but what happened was, I think one of the things I didn't want to buy into was this idea of class. I didn't like the idea of class. I kind of feel, and actually as I've studied Islam more, there was just no notion of it. You can be the most noble person, have no money whatsoever. Your nobility is connected to your behavior. Your class and status is really accorded to your understanding of the Sunnah and your understanding of actually other behavior. So it's got nothing to do with wealth. Whereas in this society, it was always linked to education and stuff. And I always felt aspiration to kind of look beyond simply what was going on around. And of course, from home, we got this idea that putar paro, you've got to study. You've got a great opportunity, and you must study, and that's what we did. But I was 16 or 17, and there was a debate on television. The first multicultural programs had come out, and Channel 4 did a show, Eastern Eye. Are we British? Are we Asian, or are we British? That kind of thing. And this is still going on. So at the age of 16, I wrote in, and I got called in. I got called into a studio debate, and off I went, and I did the studio debate. When eventually it came on at the weekend, my dad used to work in restaurants. He was a chef in the restaurants, and he never watched any television. But it was the first time he thought, well, okay, well, he's on telly, so this is a big deal. Let's there. And of course, all I had was like one little question. I put my hand up. I was in the audience, that kind of thing. but my dad sat and watched, watched the whole show. And what was great about that show was that it was my generation. It was talking about Asians, British Asians, and what our issues were, where the clashes were coming from. We were facing racism outside in the street. We were facing parents who didn't get us, who thought we should just be behaving like we're living back in Pakistan. So there was this massive clash, and this show really helped kind of express all of that, Eastern Eye. And so he watched it. It was interesting, and I think it helped him understand a little bit of what I was going through. But what was interesting was he started to watch every week, and then one week, on comes this guy, and he's like, "Oh, my dad's so excited. This is Fatih Khan, this is Kowali's, And I'm like, no, I'm not sure if I like that kind of stuff, It's interesting. And then a week later, John Peel's playing Nusrat, and then Nusrat's gone to WOMAD, and then it's like, oh yeah, have you seen this Pakistani guy? And suddenly like, what? The guy my dad likes is cool. It's like suddenly being Pakistani could be cool, And I began to realize actually that there was when I went to the studios and I met people on television, I thought, I never thought Pakistanis did this. I came from a family who had corner shops, and my dad worked in a restaurant. And it was like, you'll get an education and you'll be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And it was like, here are people working in television and talking about, culture and ideas. And that was it. I was grabbed. But I didn't think I would work in television. It's just simply something that, and I was studying design at the time, which was also causing a lot of trouble for me because my parents just didn't understand what the point of that was,
How old were you at this point? Were you in
17,
university
18.
at this point? Or?
Yeah, 17, 18. So I went off to university. I, got a degree in design. And when I graduated, terrible recession, 1990, awful recession, and no work whatsoever. And all this kind of, design work got pulled. So a lot of people left for Hong Kong, places like that. And actually, I started to write, and I did start to write about Qawwali music, about Bhangra, about my culture. And just from those early credits, then people said, look, there's opportunities in television. If you can write, you can apply for this. And it just seemed the kind of right thing to do, And there was a lot of pressure to get a career at that time, but that whole world was freelancing. It was always very, very kind of, you get 3 months here and 4 months here.
And Navid, I wanted to really kind of hone in on this point here because, so many of, our community are still, I think, in that same mindset where, and probably understandably, which is that, the media and, acting or, certain creative, whatever creative professions there are, they're often very high risk professions. And certainly in the first 5-10 years, you're almost waiting for your kind of break to come along, and it's very chancy, and yet and that is a real barrier to getting into those fields, right? And then I can understand what the opposition to that is, but then the flip side is that if we don't run that gamut, if we don't try and get into those fields, then we're going to not have anyone in those fields. And I just wanted to understand what perhaps your advice would be to someone who wants to work in the media industry or wants to work in a creative space where you are going to have to do a bit of hustling at the start. What were your kind of lessons or things that you could kind of give people who would be in that situation?
I think the problem is they're not relevant anymore, because it's changed so much. When I went, there were 4 channels. Sky had just barely started. There was no Asian channels whatsoever. There was just no Muslim channels. So there wasn't much choice if you weren't going to go take that route. And that route was there were a lot of gatekeepers. You had to be fairly kind of integrated. It was just a normal culture to go to the pub on Friday. So going off to read Jummah, you'd just lie. You wouldn't, why are you not coming with us to the pub? You would never say, I'm going to the mosque. You wouldn't out yourself as a Muslim. It was completely considered, like you're off, and actually we got in because it was this idea of being Asian, and Asian was Muslim, Sikh and Hindu together. It was just a kind of a composite idea, and that was okay. Yeah. And so the Muslim bit of it, and again, Rushdie had happened, all this. So it was very, very uncomfortable for people to kind of think that you actually believed in Islam and stuff. So you just kept it quiet, really. And I think how things have changed is that, some things have not changed. Look, if you think it's a career, you're going to really not succeed. You can't have the same parallels you can have with medicine or with finance in these areas, because you know, even people who have got years and years of experience, you can be flavor of the day. You can catch the zeitgeist, and suddenly what you're doing is in demand, and suddenly you can find yourself out of work again. And you can see that with the lives of many, many people. So I think what definitely is that it's a calling. It's something that you think, this is me. It suits your personality, and you know you've got a passion for it. And if you have a passion for something, you know, your purpose, which increasingly is something even that I've had to kind of really dig in and get coached on, understand what was that purpose that I have? Why am I doing this? Because
Yeah.
financially the link is very weak. It takes a long time for you to achieve that. So you're right there, definitely in that. But I think once you know this is what you want to do and it's in your purpose, then you stop caring, really. You stop caring about what the reward it brings you is doing the work rather than the money.
And what was your I mean, were you kind of going from job to job in that early stage
Yeah,
after
and I think
university, or?
it's very useful for a lot of people, even in many professions, that change jobs often when you're younger, and that allows you to just experience different cultures of different workplaces. And it's very valued in the media industry that you've jumped, you've done 5 months here, 6 months here, a year here, because you're just getting trained while you're doing that, and you're seeing different aspects of it. And I definitely understood at that time, look, current affairs is not really for me. I'm not that interested. I had studied design. I was very passionate about culture and arts and history, all of those kind of ideas. And so by the time I got into the BBC, I was doing programs on nothing to do with Muslims or Asian people. I started making programs on architecture and design, which I was very passionate about. And that's what came across when they hired me. They understood that I had that passion, which means you go the extra mile. So I used to bring
Sure.
all of that together. As
And
time went on,
how old were
sorry?
you how old were you at that point?
I was in my sort of, mid-20s, 24, 25, like that. And between 24, 25 and 29, about 4 or 5 years, I did a lot of military history. I worked in the history department at the BBC, which was like working in a university. I mean, there were 4 PhDs from Oxford and Cambridge, and there was me, some Pakistani guy, with these with a very useless degree from a polytechnic. That really, but where I held my own was, if they sort of, specialized in, certain types of Tudor history or the Roman Empire, whatever. Look, I went home and studied. I've believed in lifelong study. I still do. I got the books out. I could tell you minutiae details about, Aurangzeb and the Mughals and the history of this. So it was, for everybody who talked about, the Boadicea or all of that kind of stuff, I could explain to them about, about the Abbasids and about the Golden Age. And I think it's a question of finding that sort of niche for yourself. And I sort of did that. I mean, I worked on a documentary on the life of the Shah, and it was incredible. The amount, it was like £250,000 went into that for over a 1.5-year period, and it was the first time that the Shah had been reappraised. And I learned a lot. It's almost like writing a PhD, one of these documentaries, because
Yeah, I can
you're
imagine.
talking to 10 of the world's experts who all hate each other's guts and won't speak to each other. But you are the BBC, so they'll talk to you. And I was never the senior guy at that point. I was in the assistant producer, and a couple of times I felt very frustrated. Look, I've been treading water. I'd like to get promotion. And they were like, look, this is the BBC. This is how we do it. You can leave if you like, and if you go to other organizations, they'll make you a producer in 6 months. But I'm glad now I stuck it out, because I made some incredible films,
And Navid, like, it's for someone who's looking from the outside in, what does an assistant producer, like, what it's all often really hard for me and maybe members of the audience to work out exactly what goes behind creating a documentary or creating a film. What are the kind of day-to-day things that you were doing, and what was the difference between what you did and perhaps what the producer did?
So, I mean, when we say film or movies, that's a very different process.
Sure, yeah.
I sort of was in what you call factual documentaries. So often it is very similar to if a person was going to write a very large dissertation or a doctorate on something specific. So once you've actually outlined what the kind of thesis is of what you're going to explore, it's then the researcher in the team would be responsible for just basically scanning very widely. And again, when I started out, there was no internet. You know, you would go to the BBC library, and then from the BBC library, you may go to the British Library. You know, you may then go to a specialist library. So if you're doing the Vietnam War, you know, you could go to somewhere where there's military records, probably the, you know, sort of the Pentagon or something like that. And then you'd call these up, and then they'd be sent to you. And so and I'd done that for about a good few years. So you learn very, very thorough research, how to cast the net very wide. And at the same time, you're looking for those voices. You're looking for who's going to give the testimony, who's the right contributor. You're being encouraged to assess that. The assistant producer's job is a little bit more, it's the same thing, a little bit more responsibility. They're also then scanning around for how do we get access, you know. So if, I mean, I did a film on the samurai sword. And for that, you know, who are the 5 best experts in the world who can explain the history of the samurai sword? Then you kind of end up in the British Museum and you realize this person, he's a specialist on the Mongolian invasion of Japan, you know, and that fits into our story. So you do, and you'd go out, look at locations, and and the skills you need, it's what classical arts education really. I mean, that's why virtually everybody in the place is either Oxford or Cambridge, you know. You need to have an ability to organize facts, you need to analyze, you need to present information very carefully, and you also need to manage budgets, you need to look after, you know, you need to organize shoots. So there's a huge amount of multi-skilling that's required. It's almost like running a little business of your own.
I can imagine.
And heading on a trajectory. Yeah.
And was how early in this process of, you know, you creating this documentary and, you know, trying to feel out what the you know, the pieces of facts are, who's going to be speaking, that sort of thing. How early is it that you start piecing together a narrative around that? And you know, is there, how's the whole, you know, because obviously, you know, I come from a Muslim background, I'm very skeptical. I'm probably, you know, probably less skeptical than I think a lot of Muslims may be as well. But, you know, how does that whole editorial piece get controlled, and, you know, how is the narrative like structured?
There is quite a large hierarchy there, and so often the first thing is you've got to convince the person who's in charge, who controls the channels, that this is worth doing. And they'll say to you, well, why should we cover this subject? You know, why should we do it? How to do it? I mean, one of the things was I developed over a period of a year. You know, what happened was I felt very frustrated at the lack of Muslim programs. This is around about the end of about 97, 98. And I went through a lot of changes. I lost my mother to cancer. She was quite young. And it really made me kind of think very deeply about who I was as a Muslim. And I kind of really realized that actually, which was very common, that I had 2 identities. I had a very corporate business type identity, and I had a Muslim identity. And increasingly, I thought the sensible thing is that I have to find some way of coming together. I wanted to be more authentic. I didn't want to kind of pretend anymore to people. And that didn't mean I was going to kind of roll up my trousers and start jihad or anything, which most people thought that's what that meant, but it didn't. It just simply meant that it was something that I kind of, you know, this is important. It's an important part of my identity. And so I left the kind of program making side and went over to where there were issues around diversity being discussed, around representation, and that sort of put me in much more of a bureaucratic job. And I did that for a 7-month period because I was looking at audiences. What was going wrong? Why were we not able to satisfy the need for more Muslim programs, or, you know, even just general Black audience satisfaction, all of that kind of stuff. And again, it can be on one side very technical. There's a lot of feedback. There's a lot of kind of understanding. There's a science to how you monitor what's happened. But then a lot of the other side of it is just simply qualitative. It's really kind of discussing what goes on. And from that, the idea of a whole Islam season emerged, that we needed to cover Islam because it's a growing issue. And remember, this is about 97, 98. So we organized for the first time ever, we organized a conference on the coverage of Islam, you know, at the BBC. And it was meant to be, you know, I think 20, 30 people. But I got a message that the director general, the guy at the top, suddenly he said, I'm interested, I want to come. As soon as he said he was interested, I mean, half the corporation wants to come. All the senior management want to come. This thing just grew and grew and grew, you know. And actually, then I was responsible for bringing all the speakers in. And may Allah have mercy on his soul, you know, the late Fuad Nadi, he just passed away. He was one of the guys I said, look, you know, please, can you come? He was then the editor of Q News. and grassroots understanding. And so we spoke, and he came and spoke, and we had a whole bunch of people talk there. But what came out of that was that they agreed that they should do a season of programs on Islam and call it it would be the Islam season. And so then I went on a 2-year, almost a year and a half journey of developing what they would be. And for me, the idea was to try and get away from, to try and show the best of Islam. I always had thought, look, we're not seeing the best, let's see the best. So we did Islam and interior design, Islam and gardens, Islam and, we did the Hajj. Nobody had shot the Hajj for almost 20, 30 years. A beautiful documentary on trying to capture the experience of the Hajj, but also, the House of Wisdom, and I'd always had this idea about, I felt very frustrated at how badly we were represented, particularly in terms of the intellect is missing. We're kind of getting, Jajadis coming from the community to talk about let me tell you Islam, and it's like, actually, we're producing some real great intellects and thinkers, and we have this amazing heritage, and at least let's put that forward, let's right out to bat. And it was an interesting experience. We made, I think the whole season covered about 20, 30 programs. They scheduled them for August when everyone's on holiday. Of course, they were very nervous about. And I did a series of 4 or 5 programs called Inspired by Islam. We looked at, we interviewed people from Oxford on Abu Cases, of course, Abu Qasim, who is a great, surgeon, and he invented something like 400 instruments. Some of them still in use today. So we covered all this incredible stuff, and I was really hooked. I thought, wow, at last we're going to be able to show that. And these programs went out in August of 2001, and within 15 days of these programs going out, 9/11 happened.
Oh, what a disaster!
And that was it. It was like the handbrake was pulled, on what we were beginning to do, which was suddenly really put forward this incredible idea of setting the balance right, as it were, so that you could see the civilization of Islam and actually all this rich heritage we have, and still have this potential, right? Instead of just being merit. But that was it. Then it was off the cards. And then the next 4 or 5 years, I was like, became this kind of go-to guy for what does jihad mean? Where is Bin Laden hiding? All of that kind of stuff. And 6 months before 7/7, I did a radio documentary. I went up to Tipton. I interviewed kids up in the north. I interviewed all sorts of people. And the conclusion of the documentary was that there's going to be bombings, there's going to be homegrown terrorism. And as soon as I put that out, special branch turned up, the police turned up. They were like, how do you know this? The MCB, who I knew all of those guys at that time. I was their friendly guy at the BBC. They really liked brother Navid. They were like, shame on you. You're really letting the side down. Now you're saying that Muslims are going to be, British Muslims are going to be terrorists. And then of course the worst happened, and then it was like, I was on Hard Talk. How did you know this was going to happen? It's like, well, join the dots. It was only a matter of time, because and so then the demand was there, and I did a Dispatches Young, Angry and Muslim, which looked, and actually in that it became very personal for me, and that's actually what I started to understand. Everybody I'm working with goes home, has a glass of wine and chills out, and then moves on to the next assignment. I go home and I can't sleep for 3 days because the kid who's just told me how angry he is could be me, could be my cousin, could be my kids in the future, and we're in we're in trouble. This is not good. And as a journalist, you can feel quite frustrated because you're just simply reporting and you're not changing anything.
Yeah.
One of the things was I kind of really started to understand the extent to which actually, you've seen this in the Black community, where if the only role model is the hip hop guy and the drug dealer, if that's what's continuously put to you, it's not surprising that actually that's what you then you appropriate that. And that was starting to happen in our community. Gone was the idea of being somebody who worked hard and studied hard, did well. What it was taking its place was that actually, what's the point? What's the point when they hate us and we should hate them? And that's really dangerous, And
Navid, I wanted to jump onto you started Gazelle Media, but before we leave that, I just wanted to get your a quick snapshot thought on how the representation, the presentation of Muslims in the media has evolved. So it sounded like, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it just, you'd kind of helped bring about this, idea that Islam is a positive thing, and you wanted to share stuff about Islam. Maybe in the early 90s, it was much more Asians and Muslims were all kind of one thing. And then early 2000s was very much through the lens of terrorism and security. How do you think that's kind of changed over the last 15 or so years to, like, till the present date?
The change is really being led by commerce. If you in the same, you can compare what's going on with us with what's going on perhaps with the gay movement in terms of gay identity as well, because there was also this sort of sense of not being welcome in the mainstream, being seen as marginal, and then a gradual sense of acceptance. But where these things start to really become serious is because that it shows we are consumer societies. Capitalism effectively is about the flow of money and the trade, and once you can actually say 5% of this country is Muslim, and you see that as a threat. But what happens when you see that as an opportunity? Then you start to think, actually, we need to serve them. We need to kind of do better because they're our customers. And so I think what's prompted some aspects of the change is just the realization that these are customers that we're talking to. These are people who've got power. They've got money to spend. They own properties. They're large families. They buy stuff. And so once you start seeing halal meat in every supermarket as the norm, then there's enormous resistance to things like that, because there's still people who feel it's wrong. Halal meat is cruel. And so actually, when people start serving that and it becomes the norm, it's because it's about money, and that's happened to many other minority groups who were at one point vilified. Now, so even though that's taking place, at the same time, I'm not naive. I spent a period of 3 years as the director of an organization called FAIR, Forum Against Islamophobia and Racism. It was one of the first ones that was set up. It was set up about 98, 99, and it lived through all of that period of, and it had really good funding at first, and it petitioned right up to the European High Court. So it was, it did a lot of good work, but in the end, it just sort of was, got to the stage where actually, when it was getting really bad, it lost its sense of direction. And so I really do understand those aspects of what are the feeders for Islamophobia, what caused them. But what I would say is that actually it's very easy to just kind of discard all of the good stuff that's going on, because actually we're seeing more political representation taking place. We're seeing football. People are singing Muslim pub songs now because of Muslim football. So it's seeping into the culture. If you're a Liverpool fan, people call him a gift from Allah. And that's an incredible sense of acceptance of Islam on that level. But at the same time, we just look at the shocking statistics of abuse and violence towards Muslims, and it means that there's work still be done. But I don't think the difference was, I think when I was growing up, it was just pretty much very negative, and we were even thinking, should we even? I mean, in 2003, I made a program called "I'm a Muslim, Get Me Out of Here," and that was really looking at people who wanted to leave Britain or had migrated, had just thought, forget it, it's never going to be home for us anymore. They were moving to Dubai.
No, I hear you on that. Navid, I wanted to actually on the halal meat point. Interesting side story is that my college, during my first year at university, Brasenose, they were serving halal chicken, and they hadn't told anyone because they were a bit embarrassed about it. And I was the one guy in the college who was like, I can't believe I've spent the entire year having salmon and vegetarian, and there was halal meat, and there's a story in the papers about how Oxford colleges have been serving halal meat, and I'm like, if only I knew. I know, if only I knew. So there we are. But Navid, I wanted to fast forward onto you're starting your first, I think, entrepreneurial venture, which was Gazelle Media, which was a kind of media production consultancy type outfit. It would be great to hear your story about how that started, and your experience as a entrepreneur for the first time?
Yeah, I'm the reluctant entrepreneur, shall we say. So what had happened was I got to the stage where I was really boring my friends because I was just doing non-stop, terrorism and what's gone wrong, and trying to do what they call forensic journalism. And there was just there was work aplenty for me. I was in demand, but it was somewhere I was dying inside. My soul was sort of dying. So whenever I see my friends, I'd moan as hell about how, and they would say, well, what's the answer? And I'm like, look, we're doing nothing now. We're making nothing about Islamic gardens. We're making nothing about, just, calligraphy or beautiful things and stuff. And what you've got is people are just too busy talking about, is this film balanced? Because, do we put both sides of the argument across? But actually, there's an imbalance of conversations just around problems. So what we're not actually showing is actually that there's just so much else that exists, which is perfectly fine. People are just getting on with their lives and they're okay. And so I had a friend who, he had gone from being like a consultant on a, very, very good in the energy business, and literally became a multi-millionaire overnight. He was at the right time at the right place. Started a very, good energy business, and their exit from that just netted them a lot of money, and he did incredibly well. So he said, look, I'm going to back you. Everything seems to suggest that there's going to be opportunities. Gradually, things will be moving to the net. Let's get going. Come on. And really, I think it was almost 2 years of me being in denial, because I just wanted to change the BBC. I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back to Channel 4 and change them. And he used to say to me, "You're like the domestic abuse victim, in that you've been there. You're not happy. You don't like them. You don't like what they're doing, and yet you keep going back. Why do you want to go back? Why can't you see that you should be taking these guys on? You should be feeling." And I'm like, this is just ridiculous talk. How can someone like us take on such this vast corporations, and these are huge organizations? And he's like, look, if they don't want Muslim customers, you should grab the Muslim customers for yourself. Why do you not see that? And of course, I was very cynical. I just was very corporatized. I'd been institutionalized. I just couldn't see how we're ever going to make it work. But he had an incredible drive, and he really put his money where his mouth was, and that concerned me as well, because I know these things just don't make money at first. It takes a lot of investment and stuff. But what happened was, we came up with an idea called the Muslim Cafe, and it was virtually the first days of video online, and we didn't put it on YouTube. YouTube was about a year old when we started, and we started to record a discussion of what appeared to be inside a Moroccan cafe, and we designed it all, and it was beautiful. We brought different people in, and we had no presenters, and we just set them a topic. We'd film it, edit it very simply. I mean, all of it, and of course, what happened as soon as I came there, a couple of pals from the BBC who also were fed up, they joined me, and we just started to kind of turn this thing out. And it was very high production quality values, and we created the Muslim Cafe website, and we did discussions like, is Harry Potter halal? What's the problem with Muslim men? That was one of our best sellers. There's like people queuing up to watch that. What's the problem with Muslim men part 2 and 3, because it got so many views.
70% of females watching that one.
Exactly. And we did know, is hip hop halal, and I condemn violence, but it was, and so these were great debates, and we'd have everything from Muslim rappers in there right through to so we'd go away from the usual suspects. We never like to have the community as we get, and we'd also every show we'd have a non-Muslim. We'd bring non-Muslims in there just to keep that mix, and it was like, look, this is proper discussion. And it was just growing and growing and growing. I think we started hitting 50,000 regular views, within a very short period of time. And then we just collapsed. We fell off the cliff. We had no flipping idea how we're going to make any money. I had no idea whatsoever, and it was just a bunch of guys who were very good at making content, but there was just no way of monetizing it. People can say, why don't you put it on YouTube? Why don't you put it on YouTube? And I was like, well, why would I go into YouTube? How am I going to make any money on YouTube? And it's not going to make any sense, So we kind of had this website, we kept it in there, and then it was a difficult time. You just learn really hard how to hustle as an entrepreneur. You have that terrible moment. You sit 4 people down who've been working with you for a year and say, sorry, there's no more work here for you, you know, and they kind of, you hate yourself doing all that stuff, but you grow up, you realize actually this is what does it take to run a
This is
business?
what you have.
I do that
Yeah.
better. So you know, so if you ask me about that time, yeah, I'd just say lots of fail fast, fail often, you know, and you just fail, and you're all the time you're failing. If you're intelligent, like all science, you're learning, you know. And what happened after that was we just kind of got funding to do a 6-part series called The Best of British Islam, and I convinced, you know, look, we need to do this. We need to start saying what's good, because that's what's missing. And we did 6 parts, 6 documentaries on British Islam, everything from Muslim soldiers fighting in the First and Second World War, Muslim women making a kind of stand for themselves, 2 Arab girls coming to Britain for the first time, meeting Muslims, seeing what, like, you know, what they thought was going on, what
Yeah.
the reality was.
And and how was the reception with, you know, it's fantastic that you've been doing a lot of this positive, you know, representation of Muslims. How was the response like from both the Muslim community but also the non-Muslim community, and also just in terms of like hard viewership numbers? Like, does this stuff sell?
Well, we kind of started to occupy a strange space. It was no man's land, and we made it our own. We didn't fit into the kind of Islam channels and the Muslim channels, because suddenly this was content that you could watch on the BBC. It was of that style, and they didn't really kind of understand it. And not only that, but they weren't going to pay us, and we just had spent a fair bit of money on it, so we didn't want to do business with them. And then both the BBC and Channel 4 felt it was too positive. Perhaps we were too much waving the flag for positivity, so they weren't sure if they wanted to touch.
Yeah.
So we kind of were. It wasn't getting seen. That was the problem. So we distributed it as DVDs, and schools suddenly started to say, "This is great. This is exactly the kind of thing. We've got these kids here who, you know, let's face it, they need this view of Islam. We're seeing the problems here." So schools started to buy, and that kind of was really good. And then I remember going off to Cannes, you know, where all television is bought and sold. We went to the big exhibition, and suddenly, you know, 19 channels around the world bought the series. I was like, whoa. You know, nobody wants it here, but then, you know, Indonesia wants it, Malaysia wants it, you know,
Yeah.
just sell everywhere. It's like, so from that, I ended up going to Malaysia for the first time, and people, this guy's from the BBC, and he's a Muslim. Suddenly, all these doors opening, you know, kind of like very important. But, wow, you work at the Muslim, you're a Muslim, you work at the BBC, yeah, you know, like, okay, and then, you know, they had shown it, they were very interested. And then here came the kind of light bulb moment where they said, "Why did you make 6?" And I was like, "Well, that's just the norm. That's what we always do. We make 6 or 8. That's what you see in a series in the UK." And I was like, "How many do you think we should have made?" And he said, "We could put this on every day. You know, if you gave us 356 for the year, every single day people would tune in and watch it." And I was like, "Well, why? Why would they care?" You know? And he said, "London Muslim cool. What you guys have, the kind of Islam you're practicing, the kind of ideas you have, the realities that you're dealing with, the successes you have." He said, "We just look to you. You're the leaders of, you know, the thought leaders of 21st century Islam, and you've got people in parliament. You know, you're living in a non-Muslim country. People are going into parliament. You're doing all these amazing things. You work at the BBC. You know, and it's like, you know." This is just incredible. You know, what kind of headscarves you wear there, what kind of music you listen to. He said, our audience is interested in all of this. The next day, again, I sat next to a group of, and that was my introduction into the halal economy, you know, and really Malaysia was just kicking it. They're miles ahead of everybody, right? They had all sorts of ideas, built buildings, made banks, done all this kind of stuff, and they were moving into this idea of actually, you know, okay, what are the sectors? It's not just food; it's going to be, you know, finance, and then the idea of the 3 Fs came up. It was like, at first it was food, that's the necessity. Then it's finance, of course, money is important, and the third one is going to be fun. And it was like, okay, what's the fun in halal? Well, it's holiday, travel, clothes, and of course, media comes into that, entertainment, you know. And and suddenly I was like the only guy in the room who was like even thinking about making content for Muslims in that way. And everybody else who would come there was generally doing Islamic channels, which are conventional channels that teach you Quran and Hadith and all this kind of stuff. And so, so suddenly we had this space, and we've got this space to ourselves. We've got this what was no man's land. Nobody wanted this, real estate. We're the only ones there, kind of doing that. And and then I went for dinner, and I sat next to these, these incredibly intelligent Malaysian women. And what do you do? I'm the head of this bank. I'm the head of that bank. I'm the head of this hedge fund. Wow. And they said, what do you do? And I said, nothing like that. I just make films. I live in it. And by the evening, they were like, listen, you need to get a channel off the ground. You're just thinking too small. Why are you just thinking about programs, like 10 programs or 6 programs? You could package this thing. There's a massive global demand for it. And I just thought, that's interesting. So I went away, started to research it, and it just that's round about the time when I kind of thought, yeah, we could do this, because I had a couple of people come in, Habibi, we do TV channel. And it's like, la sheikh, no thanks.
And is this where Alchemia started then? This is
it really was. It sort of, Gazelle Media had kind of like proven itself to be unprofitable, proven itself to be not. It was just sort of like, that world of television is just too costly. It's just too expensive, and it's suited to people who are in the system. So if I'd made 6 programs and sold them to the BBC, I would have done very well. And I just kind of was too early. It wasn't right. There was all these kind of issues, really. And it was interesting because we had a lovely office. We had all sorts of nice space, and lots of people came. I mean, one day, a group of 6 guys from Turkey came, who had all come to do their masters in media. And I had this friend, Farouk in Istanbul, and he said, look, they're my nephews, meet these guys. And one of them, Ibrahim, he came, he wrote his dissertation on media management. We met a few times, sat, ate Turkish kebabs, talked about stuff. And then over the years, he kept, every time I went to Turkey, we would go and see him, and he progressed and progressed. And now he is actually the Director General of TRT. He runs Turkish State Television. And of course, the conversations we used to sit down and have is, why aren't there any quality dramas about the Ottomans, about Ottoman history? And of course,
smashed that now, haven't they?
Well, that it came out of those conversations. It came out of those conversations, and the right mindset is there now. And every time I see it, Navid, look, this is what we're planning for after Ertugrul. This is what we've got. So you've got this incredible person in the right place with the right backing, and you're seeing the results coming out now because of it.
Amazing.
One of the other guys, Thurkan, he was doing a master's in documentary making. So he made a film. He asked me a few times to take a look while it was in development. I gave him my thoughts, and then when he finished, he said to me, "Can you have a look at the finished thing?" And it was just like, I was like, "How much did this cost you?" And he said, "Oh, about £2,000." And I just said, "Look, I'm starting a channel. I'm starting a channel, because actually I realized the money aspect of it was not the barrier anymore. It wasn't going to be the barrier. What the barrier was, for us, the barriers had gone. What we had was, we understood how to make content. We understood how to make quality content. The price of the cameras had dropped. There were more people coming into the business, young people wanting to do it. And actually, for me, it was a maturing. I kind of also thought, look, I need to just raise my game, and I know I can find all this stuff and begin to kind of consolidate it. And of course, what kind of channel am I going to produce? Of course, it's going to be the BBC of Islam or the National Geographic of Islam, because I'm passionate about history. I worked in the history department. I didn't even think about the movies and the dramas and all of that. I just wanted to make 20 different films on the Soljiks or the Abbasids or whatever, and it's just for blokey guys like me, who are really passionate about all this stuff. And then I love the art. I love all the Islamic art, the mosques and all the architecture. And of course, as we started to kind of do the surveys, run a professional business, get in, meet all the focus groups, do all this stuff, you realize, the demand's there. It's got to also be female friendly. There's no point. We're over dominated with blokes with beards running these channels, selecting the content. We have to have a female feel to it. It has to have, of course, intelligent stuff for kids. I mean, that's the massive market, which it's just rubbish. It's absolutely embarrassing, the content that's being produced for children at the moment. You know, and then also that's where this word came out, global urban Muslims, and I began to make a distinction. Yeah, okay, a quarter of the planet is Muslim, but there's just no way that the channel I'm putting together is going to appeal to everybody. The people I feel who are the most neglected are the most intelligent, the most educated. They're not getting content delivered to them at the level that they need, because, you know, like yourself, you're Oxford and Cambridge educated. It's just, some of it's just very trite what's out there. You know, it's just paper thin. So,
Yeah.
you know, you can't have one size fits all. You know, there needs to be differentiation in the market. I'm not dissing those guys. They do a great service. They're community based and they work for the majority of people who are their customers. But increasingly, a lot of my circle weren't watching that kind of. They weren't watching, and they weren't interested in that. You know, and
Yeah.
so we made this distinction, which actually means that we probably are never going to be a mainstream Muslim product, but we know there's enough of a market that can really sort of, you know, make it economically viable for us, because actually it's the price has come down quite significantly. And then on another level, it's not a product, it's not a service. Just like you might switch from Netflix to Amazon one day and back to Disney. It's a movement. We're really asking people to come together so that we can begin to articulate and have a body of work which really represents who we are now. You know, I mean, a lot of what we've got is historical, but who are we now? Who are we now? How do we want to define ourselves? We don't want to just define ourselves as taxi drivers and, you know, no offense, right? But it's also actually we represent intelligence, we represent ambition, we represent innovation, and we have this kind of, you know, this growing idea of the halal
Yeah.
economy, and we have to play a part in that. And so for us,
Yeah.
we kind of defined who our audience was, and we've gone for that. And we haven't spoken about Amazon. Our time's almost up.
Well, we should speak about Amazon, and you know, I'd love to hear how that whole you know, that whole thing came about, what your experience has been like, and then, you know, given the time, it'd be great to also hear about, you know, what the future holds for Alchemia and Navid Akhtar.
So Amazon called us actually from Seattle, and we were quite shocked and very excited. And they said, "Look, we've got 22,000 titles in the Prime library, and people are saying it's taking 45 minutes for them to find something, and then they give up. So we're going to be putting about 70, 80 channels together. Some of them we put together ourselves, but looking at the data, we definitely wanted to do something for Muslims." And so we scoured around the world, and everybody kept saying, "Look, go to Alchemia. They're the ones who are doing this. They're the ones who understand this." So we were quite, you know, wow, we were quite touched. And at that time, we said, "Look, we don't have enough content. We don't think we can. It's going to be worth your while to have us in that system. When we're ready, we'll come back." They were like, "No. It's digital land grab, really. You grab it and put it in." But they also, I think, you know, there's talk of just put it this way. I mean, the populations in the UK and US are insignificant compared to the populations in Asia, and I think that's
Yeah.
where the long-term kind of idea is, that's where it will head to. And so yeah, I mean, it's been great being with them. It's really helping. The subs are just going crazy because of lockdown, and Amazon keep offering stuff, and people like it because I think they trust us. And why did we get that? I think simply the professionalism and also contacts. I mean, the contacts I have at the BBC means I can provide the right references, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, you've got to remember, a lot of Muslim media projects are just good intention. They're well-intentioned people who think it's some kind of dawah or they'd like to do that, and they're not bringing any kind of professional history to how they're doing it. And
Yeah.
that we're one of the first groups of people who've done that. And you can, you know, and I think they, you know, I mean, we're now talking to other platforms who are interested in carrying it. Apple run channels, so they've got a slot in channels. Increasingly have got, you know, anybody who's serving Netflix is also interested in adding other versions of that on there.
Yeah.
And we're talking to those people.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that's that. And what was the second part of the question?
And like, it is, does Alchemia come up with, is it that you kind of buy the rights to various different assets and collate them together, or do you also produce your own stuff as well, or it's a mixture of the two?
Yeah, it's a mixture of the two. I mean, we did produce two when we started out. It's obviously a lot more expensive, That's really where we feel it will begin to have its own. There's no shortage of ideas of what needs to be made. There's huge gaps. I mean, I'm just putting together a collection at the moment on Pakistan, and I can find 10 films on, the Red Mosque and Lal Masjid. I can find films on the Taliban in Pakistan. I can find films on, you name it, economic collapse. I can find 50 films on partition. I can't even find a film on Badshah Mosque. There isn't actually even a documentary on Jinnah. There's a film on Jinnah which has been caught up in a legal battle since it was made, so it's hard to get the rights. There's not even a documentary on Jinnah. There definitely isn't anything on Chaudhry Rahmat Ali. There's nothing on the Pakistanis of Cambridge. There's nothing. I mean, we've got the only film on Iqbal that's worth showing. So it's a sad state. There's if you go to Turkey, it's much better. It's very well documented history, heritage, what they're doing. Pakistan is really behind, really behind. Iran is very good. So yeah. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. What you were asking me?
I was asking, what are you guys do commission stuff as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing where the holes are, where people want to see things. We found a fantastic documentary on the Quran, a very comprehensive. Because these are what I feel are the landmark series that need to exist, and but there's nothing that's ever been produced by Muslims. So often we'll find content in the mainstream which we'll scan it, we check everything. We do not want to be in any way be promoting anything anti-Islamic or anything that has negative issues in it or that kind of thing. So generally we have that filter there. But what we're hoping for is that actually there's something that comes from the Muslims themselves, which says, here is that, and what would a documentary on the Quran have in it? A 5-part series or a 6-part series. It'd be everything from the calligraphy to the styles of recitation to. I mean, I've filmed second Hijra Mahil written Qurans on camel bone, and they're in the British Library. So the British Library loves to kind of bring them out and show you. They would love to make that film with you and collaborate with you. But someone's got to put in order to do a decent job on it, you're looking at about £500,000, £500K
wow.
to make that. But that would be, that's why then you feel proud of it. You think, wow, look at this, because it's just produced beautifully, done very well. There's so many different styles of reciting the Quran, that you would need to film those experts. And then just the kind of nuts and bolts history, right down to the printing of the first British version of the Quran, which in itself is enshrined with Cromwell and the Roundheads and that period of history here. And it comes in at a very important part of British English history because they were very threatened by the Turks. And so George Sale prints the Quran in English. And it's interesting how that's perceived. So all of this, do you know what I mean? It's a comprehensive thing, and this is what we were always told at the BBC: when you make this, you want to be making this so that people are going to watch it for another 20 years. It's got longevity, but that ambition, I think, I know it's there. We're there. We have the skills. We have the resources. But it's hard to ask people just to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. You have to kind of spend some money somewhere so people can do that.
Yeah, and Navid, what would you say is what does the future hold for Alchemia?
Well, hopefully good. I hope. I mean, we soon, very soon. I mean, we're almost there. We will be probably the largest online library of content about Islam. And when I say content about Islam, I'm not talking about endless kind of sort of video courses on Quran and Hadith and all of that kind of stuff. I'm talking really from the point of view of here are films which have been shown on television channels around the world, Muslim world and the non-Muslim world. And I think for us, it's this idea that actually people use it to feed. For me, if we become the most viewed Muslim channel in Israel, that'd be great. Fantastic. If we become the most viewed Muslim channel, if Trump wants to view us, fantastic. I'd be really happy. These are my ambitions, that actually we get this to the people who really can watch it and see us in a different way, because that's really the ambition. So I think for us, it's we kind of sort of just come out with it. We're not here to convert anybody. That's not really our job. All of it is that we are sharing with you what we care about and how we'd like you to understand us. That's really important to us, is that people watch it. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair for all of that. It's been a real education, discussing this whole area with someone who has actually has deep roots in this slightly mystical industry, I think, when it comes to Muslims. I wanted to pick up just a couple of questions before we wrap up from the audience. One, Abu Bakr Abadi has asked when Alchemia will be available in France.
Yeah, we're working on it. I think we've gone into about 5 countries in Europe, and there's just some, because we deal with professional rights management, a lot of the content is very high quality. It's just the kind of stuff we can't just put on without, negotiating all of that. And again, the thing why a lot of people are working with us is because we're bringing revenue back to the producers. I mean, there's so much stuff just uploaded onto YouTube for free, which people have spent millions making. And so this is going to be changing soon. YouTube themselves are cracking down on that. So it's sometimes the delays that we're contracting, but yeah, France definitely. We're working on it.
Brilliant. And then finally, Asma is asking about how do you think if people will through your work, the world will look at Islam and Muslims in a more kind of progressive way.
Oh, Ya Rab, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, look, I think you go crazy if you try to think too much about the end result. What you do is you have good intentions yourself, good niyyah. You work to a possibility of what you're doing for it. Wouldn't it be wonderful if this happened, if that happened? But I think for us, the main focus is you just get on with it. You just get on and do that. But of course, we hope it's there. I mean, we'd like to. I mean, we're thinking. We know the guys at Launch Good. They're great supporters. So what we're saying is maybe we'll go on there and look to give away 1,000 free subscriptions to churches, synagogues, universities, where people might not want to try it and they can have a go.
Brilliant. Well, Suleiman, my son has made an appearance, and it's probably an apt point to call a day to this. Jazakallah khair, Navid. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. And until next time, to all of the listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. And please do try it. Alchemia.com. Do subscribe, have a look at it. We need all the help we can get.
Definitely. We need to support our own community initiatives if they're going to succeed.